Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I want to talk about the breaking news coming in that a French ship has managed to cross the Strait of Hormuz. So without further ado, let's get into it. I've come across an article from Euronews and it's being flagged in Politico and The Telegraph and a few other newspapers about a French ship crossing the Strait of Hormuz in the first Western European transit during the Iran war. Now, if you'll recall, I've been saying that up until yesterday that I had known of, there were no French, Italian, no European ships that had crossed the Strait of Hormuz. And I also criticized the Europeans and the British for not having laid their red lines in the sand, saying to the Iranians, listen, we have no part in this war. We're not supporting either parties. We just want to remain neutral. However, if our energy infrastructure is targeted by way of ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz carrying energy requirements that are vital to our security in Europe, and if the energy infrastructure of our partners is targeted in the Gulf regions, then you will have twisted our hand and given us no other recourse but to enter the war to make sure that our energy supplies are not disrupted. And I think that would have got them a far better understanding within the Iranian regime, because then the Iranian regime would have known that there's an option on the table, there's an either or. And it would have also given us some standing within the wider geopolitical community at large, saying you've laid down your red line. Yes, you're not a part of it and you don't want your energy to be affected. Let them get on with their war as long as it doesn't include you. And you have every right then to react or to retaliate. However, the UK and the Europeans chose the side of we're not getting involved, and it came across more as like a tit for tat against the Americans. Had they not had the spat with the Americans, I suspect they would have been involved in the war. But because of their dislike for Donald Trump and the recent, altercations they've had with him at Davos over Greenland, over Europe walking back its policies, all those things, all that negativity had led them to the point where the Europeans and the British came out and said, it's not our war. We're not getting involved. There were no red lines. Behind closed doors, the Iranians suspect that bases were being used and the waters got muddied, and the Iranians, the first thing the war started, they hit the British base and they began sanctioning tankers going through the Strait of Hormuz, which then affected European energy security. And that is the case as we speak. You'll recall as well, I put up an article where the Iranians are said to be charging a toll fee or a levy on ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz should they need to get through, and this could be paid either by way of cryptocurrency or in yuan. So the Chinese have a vested interest in this because their oil's getting through, but at the same time they're also getting their currency being used as a type of a petro yuan, if you want, for example. So they're winning on both ends of the spectrum. The 5 countries that were allowed to transit through there were India, Russia, China, Pakistan, and Iraq. And a lot of those countries have some leverage over the Iranian regime in some way. The reason I say this is, for example, I think 90% of the rice in Iran comes from India. The Iranians are heavily dependent on the Chinese for intelligence gathering and military equipment, and the same can be said of the Iranian dependence on the Russians. So those 5 countries' tankers were allowed to go through. However, I suspect that this French ship that has gone through, I think that money has changed hands here. And I think that should the Americans pull out of the Strait of Hormuz and pull out of Iran altogether, I think that this is going to be the playbook moving forward, and trade going through this strait is going to need to be subjected to some sort of payment mechanism. And I think the Iranians have just weaponized and monetized the Strait of Hormuz for the benefit of the Iranian regime, because the money that's going to be collected from this, I don't think it's going to go into reconstruction and development of Iran to try and make Iran a better place. I think it's going, or rebuild Iran. I think it's going to go into military and defense capabilities, much like you see with the money that goes into Gaza being channeled into Hamas coffers to then build these tunnels and amass uh, uh, weapon stockpiles. But nevertheless, let's have a look at what this article says. A vessel owned by France's CMA-CGM has become the first ship tied to Western Europe to cross the Strait of Hormuz since the outbreak of the Iran war in late February. According to ship tracking data, a container ship indicating French ownership by the shipping and logistics giant CMA-CGM has reportedly become the first vessel with Western European ties to cross the Strait of Hormuz since the start of the Iran war. The Maltese flag CMA-CGM Kribi, belonging to the world's third largest container line, sailed eastbound from waters off Dubai on Thursday afternoon. Ship tracking data showed the vessel broadcasting its French ownership as it transited the Iranian coastline, navigating the approved corridor between the islands of Keshem and Larak. The ship had remained idle in the Gulf since early March, like many other non-Iranian vessels, after the conflict sharply curtailed commercial traffic. CMA-CGM, majority owned by the Saadeh family, is understood to have coordinated the transit with Iranian maritime authorities. The vessel is believed to be heading towards Point Noir in the Republic of Congo as part of a service linking India, the Middle East, Gulf, and Africa. Its passage follows earlier successful transits by Chinese-linked ships. The news could encourage other carriers to resume operations if the corridor proves reliable in the coming days. The article then further goes on. Iran in talks with Oman. On Thursday, Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibadi also announced that the country is drafting a protocol with Oman to secure traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, according to the Iranian state media. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, are allegedly seeking to charge tolls starting at $1 a barrel and considering payment settlements in either Chinese yuan or stablecoins. There are purportedly discussions about requiring ships to submit detailed data to IRGC-linked intermediaries for approval, with access determined by a country ranking system. There's also talks of the first LNG tanker that has now entered the Strait of Hormuz in what could be the first transit of its kind since the conflict began. So, again, what I wanted to say is that this friendship going through, and this article here highlights, when they say in talks with Oman, the IRGC Guard Corps are allegedly seeking to charge tolls starting at $1 a barrel and considering payment settlements in either Chinese yuan or stable coins. And this for me is telling, and this is what I was talking about earlier on regarding this issue, and that should the Americans decide to up and leave Iran and exit the war in Iran, they're going to leave the Strait of Hormuz the way it is, and it's going to be down to the Europeans to then try and help sort out this mess in the Strait of Hormuz, which is then going to cost them dearly, which inevitably will cost the European taxpayer and the British taxpayer, because, I don't see Keir Starmer writing a personal check for this. He's going to use our money to try and sort this out. I just think that, had they been firm and direct in their mediation with the Iranians right at the outset, I think we could have avoided this debacle. Or at least, even if we got to this stage, the Europeans could have said to the Iranians, under no circumstances are we going to pay you any extra money to have our goods ferried through this strait. We will assemble a worldwide coalition of countries that are all now affected, because if you can do it to us, you're going to do it to them. And we will make sure that we keep this. The Iranians are not going to take on the entire world. And that is why I think this was a geopolitical diplomatic disaster. But then again, we have nobody in Europe or the United Kingdom in diplomatic roles that are worth their salt. They have absolutely nothing going for them by way of diplomacy. These are all spring chickens growing up, in bubbles, living their lives of luxury and trying to dictate foreign policy on the world stage, looking like a bunch of morons. I keep coming back to Kaya Kallas and Elena Baerbock. You see it. I'm going to put up an article. I'm going to do a little video on an article by Ray McGovern and Kaya Kallas as a diplomat, so you understand what I'm saying and where I'm coming from. Because as a student of history, I'll tell you, this woman is absolutely deluded. Not only her, most of them running around Europe are of the same mindset. They are as thick as anything. How one can speculate how they got to the positions that they have. However, they have absolutely zero acumen. Their intellect is devoid. There is nothing there. The space between the two ears is absolutely vacant. You can park one of these oil tankers in there, because that's how vacant that space is. And when these morons are then out there perpetuating policy in the names of the European Union and the United Kingdom and their respective countries, they just go on to make us look like a bunch of idiots. Because that is what has happened in Europe. You've got an education system that has churned out these elites that are so hubristic in nature that they have zero intellect, zero intelligence. I keep going back to this. Go to the Canadian Parliament when they all stood up and applauded Yaroslav Hanka.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian-Canadian war veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. I wish to apologize to the House. No one, including you, my fellow parliamentarians, or the Ukraine delegation, was privy to my remarks prior to their delivery.
Why? Because he fought the Russians during the Second World War. Now, step back for a second. The Second World War was between Nazi Germany and its allies, the Japanese, the Italians, the Hungarians for a part, and factions within each country that supported the Nazi regime. But by and large, the allies were the United States, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, Europe. Europe was decimated by the Nazis. The Canadians were fighting on behalf of the free world against the Nazis, fighting together with the Russians. Yet they all stood up and applauded and saluted this man, who was actually part of a team that was responsible for killing their own people. But why it matters? It matters because people like Chrystia Freeland, whose grandfather was a neo-Nazi. It matters because the British then repatriated a lot of these Ukrainian nationalists from the ONU, from these former Banderites to come and live in Salisbury because they could be used as a tool against the communists later. And their sick mindset has now permeated into our intelligentsia, into our political class, into our diplomatic class. And this is what you see. This is the madness that you see. Because everything that the Nazis did during the Second World War now has been whitewashed. So these are the level of people that we have heading our foreign policy and being diplomatic on our behalf. Good luck. I want to thank you for spending time with us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.